I've always believed that some stories don't really begin when we think they do. They start earlier, long before anyone notices the first crack. And sometimes, as an outsider hearing the story, I can almost feel the moment where everything could have been stopped, if someone had simply paid attention. That's what makes what happened to Daniel so haunting to look back on. Daniel was the kind of man people liked to admire. A successful businessman, a devoted father in the eyes of neighbors, the type who showed up to school presentations with a phone full of photos of his kids. He had a calm smile, a firm handshake, and the kind of presence that made clients trust him instantly. In my opinion, people like him often forget they're human. They start believing their own image, wearing it like armor. And when the real self underneath begins to fracture, the outside world has no idea. He was 42, partner in a thriving logistics company expanding faster than he could emotionally keep up with. He spent more time in airports and back-to-back meetings than at home. He always justified it in the same way most people do when they don't want to face an inconvenient truth. "It's for my family," he'd say. "I need to secure our future." And everyone around him nodded, because that's what we do, we support the story someone tells themselves, even when it's obviously a shield. But what no one knew was that Daniel wasn't just running a company. He was also running from his own life. He had been married to Helena for 15 years. She was warm, patient, and the kind of woman who believed every marriage could survive as long as two people kept talking. She was always attentive, always present. I personally think she loved him more deeply than he ever allowed himself to understand. Their home was filled with the loud, messy beauty of two children, Lucas, 10 years old, curious and always asking questions about how things worked, and little Sophia, 7, a girl with soft curls and the habit of hugging people without warning. That house was full of life, full of small joys that many people dream of but never get. And yet, for Daniel, it wasn't enough. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about boredom. It was about escape. I've seen this before, and maybe you have too, people who step into someone else's arms not because they're missing something at home, but because they're missing something inside themselves. Her name was Mia. She lived in another city, about 2 hours away, which made it easier for Daniel to pretend their affair existed in a separate universe with separate rules. She was 27, studying design, and working part-time at a cafe near one of Daniel's distribution centers. They met by accident the first time. Or at least, that's what he told himself, because admitting otherwise would force him to confront his intentions. What started as casual conversation slowly morphed into something dangerous, messages late at night, excuses to pass through her city, hotel rooms disguised as business trips. And the worst part was that he believed he was in control. People always think that. They believe affairs are like switches they can turn on and off. But in reality, they're more like fires started in dry fields. Once they spark, they run wherever they want. For a year, Daniel lived a double life. At home, he tucked his children into bed, kissed Helena's forehead, and joined her for dinner as if everything was fine. But away from home, he let himself become another version of Daniel, a freer, younger, lighter version, at least in his imagination. Mia was the escape he convinced himself he deserved after years of stress and responsibility. But the truth has a way of arriving uninvited, and when it does, it never knocks gently. It began with a message. A short, simple text from Mia that hit him like a punch. "We need to talk. It's important." Daniel felt an immediate tightness in his stomach. He knew that tone. It was the same tone he'd heard before from friends who got themselves into trouble they couldn't hide anymore. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer. And throughout the day, while pretending to be focused in meetings, he felt a creeping dread he hadn't felt in years. I remember thinking, when he later described the moment to someone, that this was the kind of fear only people who lie understand. It's a fear shaped like consequence. That night, he drove 2 hours to see her. When he arrived, she wasn't angry. She was scared. Truly scared. And when she looked at him, her eyes were already glossy with tears she had been holding back. "I'm pregnant," she said. Daniel felt the world collapse inward. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just stood there, unable to breathe. Because he knew, the problem wasn't the baby. The problem was everything that would come after. Mia explained she was 6 weeks along, that she had taken tests, that she planned to keep it, and that she didn't want to hide anymore. And for the first time, Daniel realized something he had desperately tried to avoid: this wasn't a separate universe anymore. This was now his real life. He begged her to give him time. A week. 2. Something. Anything. But Mia had reached her limit. A person can hold a secret for a while, but not forever. And Daniel had never promised her anything concrete. He gave her affection, attention, and pieces of time that didn't belong to him, but he never gave her commitment. She was done living in the shadows. The following days were a blur. Daniel was distracted at home, speaking less, pacing more. Helena asked if he was stressed, and he said yes, because it was the only thing he could say without collapsing. Then came the day everything unraveled. It was a Friday, late afternoon. Daniel had left the office exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, trying to figure out what to do. He drove home slowly, rehearsing explanations in his head that he knew were useless. He wondered whether Mia would wait, whether Helena would suspect anything, whether he could somehow control the fire before it spread. He couldn't. When he pulled into the driveway, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The house looked normal, yes, but too normal. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air is trying to warn you. Daniel stepped inside and called for Helena. No answer. He walked through the house, into the living room, and froze. Mia was there. Standing in the middle of his home. In front of his wife. Helena's face was pale, her arms crossed tightly as if she were holding herself together. Mia's expression was a mix of fear, determination, and heartbreak. And for a second, Daniel thought he was dreaming. That this wasn't real. That the two worlds he kept so carefully separated couldn't possibly be overlapping like this. But they were. I've heard stories of confrontations before, but nothing quite like this one. There was no screaming at first. No chaos. Just silence, the kind that hurts. Daniel's keys fell from his hand and hit the floor with a metallic echo. Helena was the one who finally spoke, her voice shaking. She says you've been having an affair. Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He couldn't even produce a lie. Mia stepped forward slightly, her voice trembling. I told her everything. I couldn't keep living like this. And I'm pregnant. It's his. The words felt like a blade slicing through the air. Helena closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek. Not the loud tears of someone angry, but the quiet tears of someone whose heart has just been broken cleanly in two. Daniel felt his entire world collapse. In that moment, he understood something important, something people don't realize until it's too late: secrets don't stay buried. They rot. And eventually, they surface. The room felt smaller and smaller as he tried to speak, tried to apologize, tried to explain something that had no explanation. And all the while, Mia stood there, trembling, regretting the pain she had caused but believing she had the right to the truth. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't the kind of scene you see in movies where furniture flies and voices echo through the neighborhood. Real life rarely looks like that. Real life breaks quietly. Helena asked Mia to leave. Not angrily, not even rudely. She simply couldn't bear another minute of sharing the same air with her husband's mistress. Mia nodded, tears streaming, and walked out slowly. Daniel watched her go, torn between guilt and fear, between responsibility and devastation. But the moment the door closed, he turned back to Helena, who looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. How long? She whispered. Daniel swallowed, his voice barely audible. A year. Helena's knees seemed to weaken, and she sat down, burying her face in her hands. I always think about this part of the story, because you don't have to know a person personally to feel their pain. You only need to recognize the human parts, the betrayal, the shock, the falling apart. Daniel tried to explain, but everything he said sounded hollow even to him. He said he never meant for it to happen. He said he loved Helena. He said he didn't know who he was during that year. But none of it mattered. Not the intentions. Not the regrets. Not the remorse. Because once trust is shattered, there is no elegant way to gather the pieces. Helena eventually stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She looked at Daniel with a combination of heartbreak and calm resignation. I don't even know what to feel, she said softly. But I know I can't even look at you right now. She left the room, and Daniel didn't follow. He stood alone in the living room, feeling the weight of every lie he had told, every excuse, every moment he pretended everything was normal. He walked outside. The sun had nearly set, leaving streaks of orange across the sky. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt truly alone, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, painfully alone. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, feeling as if he had destroyed not just his marriage but his own identity. The man who stood there wasn't the successful businessman, the confident father, the charming partner. He was just a man who made a series of choices without thinking about the consequences, and now the consequences were all he had left. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if Helena would forgive him, or if his children would ever understand, or if Mia truly wanted him in her life or only wanted the truth to be known. Everything was uncertain, suspended in a moment of unbearable silence. And that is where the second part of this story begins, not with the reveal, but with what comes after. Daniel stayed outside longer than he realized. The night had fully settled by the time he finally walked back inside, quietly, almost like a guest in his own home. He didn't know where Helena was, but he didn't call out to her. Something in him sensed she needed space, the kind you give someone when the air between you is filled with broken pieces. He sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, breathing deeply as if forcing himself to stay present. It's strange how silence can feel louder than words. I've always believed that silence after a confession is one of the most violent things a person can experience, not because of what's said, but because of what isn't. Upstairs, Helena was sitting on the floor of their bedroom with her back against the bed. She wasn't crying anymore. She was numb, staring at the wall as if it had answers. The betrayal didn't register as a single event, it hit her in waves, the nights he came home late, the trips that lasted longer than expected, the sudden exhaustion that made him distant. It all made sense now. And that was the part that hurt the most. When she finally came downstairs, Daniel stood. He wasn't sure whether to speak first or let her lead the moment. She didn't sit. She stood across from him, not close, not far, just enough distance to show how broken things had become. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but steady. Does she want to be with you? Daniel shook his head slowly. She wants a father for her child. And she wants the truth. Helena closed her eyes for a second. And what do you want? He hesitated. And that hesitation was its own confession. I want my family, he said. I want you. I want our kids. I want a life that makes sense again. Helena didn't react. She simply let his words hang between them, suspended in uncertainty. Then she asked something he wasn't prepared for. Do you love her? Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't love Mia, not in the way love should be defined. But he did love what she represented, escape, youth, a version of himself he thought he lost. But he couldn't say that. Not out loud. No, he whispered. I don't. Helena studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity, or maybe for the man she once knew. She didn't find either, not yet. I need time, she said. He nodded immediately, almost desperately. Of course. Anything. She walked away again. Not upstairs this time, but outside, needing the fresh air he had needed earlier. Daniel watched her from the window. Her posture looked small, fragile in a way he had never seen. It struck him that betrayal doesn't just wound, it reshapes a person. Later that night, Helena didn't sleep beside him. She stayed in the guest room, the door closed. Daniel lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant hum of appliances, wondering how long it would take to undo the damage, or whether undoing was even possible. The next morning, the children woke up unaware of the storm brewing beneath the roof. But kids have a strange intuition. Lucas watched his parents quietly at breakfast, his eyes bouncing between their faces. Helena forced a smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel avoided meeting her gaze altogether. After dropping them at school, Helena asked Daniel to drive with her. She didn't say where they were going. And he didn't ask. He felt like a man awaiting a verdict. They drove in silence for 20 minutes until she finally pulled into a quiet park. They sat on a bench near a pond where ducks floated lazily, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding a few feet away. Helena finally spoke. I need to know everything. I need to hear it from you, not from her. And Daniel told her. Not everything, humans rarely confess everything, but enough. Enough for Helena to understand the timeline, the choices, the deceit. Enough for her to know he had not just slipped, but repeated the slip until it became a pattern. When he finished, she looked away, her voice trembling with heartbreak and exhaustion. I don't know if I can forgive you. Daniel lowered his head. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll wait as long as you need. Helena exhaled shakily. The problem isn't whether you'll wait. The problem is whether I'll ever feel safe with you again. That sentence cut deeper than anything Mia had said the night before. Over the next days, Helena became quieter. She still cared for the kids, still spoke to Daniel about practical things, school, bills, schedules, but emotionally, she drifted. And Daniel felt it every second. It was like watching sand fall through an hourglass. You can't stop it, you can only witness each grain slipping away. Mia, on the other hand, didn't reach out. She respected Helena's need for distance, but also hoped Daniel would take responsibility soon. She wasn't trying to steal him. She wasn't trying to replace Helena. She was scared, alone, and pregnant with a child who deserved a father. But the truth was, neither woman trusted Daniel anymore, one because he had betrayed her, and the other because he had promised nothing. After a week of almost unbearable tension, Helena asked Daniel to meet her parents at their home. Daniel's stomach twisted. Telling your in-laws about your affair is like stepping into a courtroom with no lawyer and no defense prepared. Her father barely looked at him. Her mother cried. And Helena explained everything, calmly, but with a raw honesty that made Daniel feel smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. He apologized. He took responsibility. And though they allowed him to speak, he could feel the anger, the disappointment, the protective instinct rising from both parents like a wall he wasn't allowed to climb. Afterward, in the car, Helena sighed deeply. They think I should leave you. Daniel felt panic surge through him. Do you want to? Helena didn't answer. And that silence was worse than any answer she could have given. Days turned into weeks. Not much changed outwardly, but inside the house the emotional distance grew louder. Daniel tried everything, therapy suggestions, daily check-ins, heartfelt apologies, even giving Helena complete access to his phone and accounts. But you can't force healing. You can only offer space. One night, after putting the kids to sleep, Helena finally approached him in the living room. Her expression was calm, almost too calm. I spoke to Mia today, she said. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. What did she say? She said she's not asking you to be with her. Just to acknowledge the baby. She said she doesn't want the child to grow up thinking their father abandoned them. Daniel nodded slowly. She's right. Helena's eyes welled up. Do you want to be involved? He hesitated again, a mistake he seemed doomed to repeat. Yes. I can't abandon my child. Helena looked down, swallowing hard. I know. I wouldn't want you to. Then she added softly, but I don't know if I can stay in a marriage where there's another child involved. Not because of the baby. But because of the pain attached to it. Daniel felt something inside him collapse. Helena, please. I'm not leaving today, she interrupted. I'm not making any decisions right now. I just need you to understand that this isn't about punishment. It's about survival. I'm trying to survive what you did to me. Her voice cracked on the last word. From that day forward, their marriage entered a quiet limbo. Not broken, but not whole. Not together, but not separated. A suspended state where every conversation felt like stepping on thin ice. Meanwhile, Mia's pregnancy progressed. She had her first ultrasound. She sent Daniel a photo, not to make things harder, but because she felt he had the right to know. Daniel stared at that blurry image for a long time, feeling both awe and crushing guilt. A new life was forming, a child he never planned, but one he couldn't deny. Helena saw the photo accidentally when she passed by the kitchen counter. She didn't cry. She simply turned away and went to the bathroom, where she locked the door. Daniel listened to the sink water running for nearly 10 minutes, long enough for someone to hide tears. Months went by. Daniel went with Mia to a few medical appointments, always keeping Helena informed. He didn't hide anything anymore. Transparency became his only lifeline. He didn't touch Mia. He didn't treat her as a partner. He treated her as the mother of his child, and nothing more. But every step forward with Mia felt like a step backward with Helena. The children didn't know the truth yet. Lucas sensed something was wrong but couldn't name it. Sophia remained blissfully unaware. And Helena, she was fighting a quiet war inside herself, torn between the love she once knew and the pain she couldn't forget. As Mia's due date approached, Helena made a decision that shook Daniel more than the revelation of the affair itself. One evening, after dinner, she sat across from him and said, "When the baby is born, I want you to be there. You should be. But afterward. I need space. Real space. I need time to rebuild myself without feeling like I'm constantly reopening a wound." Daniel felt a chill. "What are you saying?" She inhaled deeply. "I want a separation. Not necessarily forever. But for now." It was a quiet sentence, delivered gently, but it hit like a hammer. Daniel's voice broke. "Helena, please." She reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "I'm not abandoning us. I'm saving myself so that maybe, I can come back whole." And he understood. For the first time, he truly understood. When Mia went into labor, Daniel was there the whole time. Mia held his hand, not romantically, but gratefully. The baby, a boy, arrived crying with the force of a life determined to be heard. When the nurse placed the newborn in Daniel's arms, he felt something shift inside him. A heavy, painful clarity. This child was innocent. This child deserved a father who wouldn't repeat the mistakes that led to his existence. But as he held the baby, the first person he thought of was Helena. And the crack in his heart widened. After the birth, Daniel went home to pack a suitcase. Helena helped him fold his clothes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence was full of everything they couldn't say without breaking. When Daniel finally stepped outside with his suitcase, Helena followed. She didn't kiss him goodbye. She didn't ask him to stay. She simply looked at him with eyes full of unresolved love and unbearable pain. "Fix yourself," she whispered. "Fix what made you break us." And then, we'll see. And he nodded, tears slipping down his face. He walked away, not from his family, not from his responsibilities, but from the man he used to be. A man who lived in shadows. A man split between two worlds. A man who didn't know how to choose the right path until everything he cared about was shattered. And that is how Daniel began the long, painful journey of rebuilding, alone, but not defeated. In the months that followed, Daniel devoted himself to becoming the man he should have been long before the fall. He showed up for his children. He supported Mia and his newborn son with responsibility, not affection confused as escape. And he gave Helena the distance she asked for, no matter how much it hurt. Healing wasn't quick, and forgiveness wasn't guaranteed. But for the first time in years, Daniel stopped running from himself. And sometimes, rebuilding begins exactly where everything broke, at the moment a person decides they will no longer be the one who destroys what they love.